So I'm Danny Jamieson, reporter for BT Sport.
Cool. So with the signing of Antony to Manchester United, making him the fourth most expensive transfer in the league's history, do you think that sets a precedent for future windows?
In terms of him specifically, I'm not sure it does. Antony's a player that the new Manchester United boss Erik ten Hag knows very well, and it's him that's sort of pushed for it. While his numbers in the Eredivisie aren't hugely impressive on paper, he's a player that clearly Ten Hag thinks can improve Manchester United and can bring the sort of football that he wants to the club. So in that sense, I don't think it necessarily sets a precedent. This is just a player that the manager wanted to bring to the club to help sort of translate his style of football to a squad that he hasn't necessarily built. However, I thought it was interesting that the Ajax manager, Alfred Schreuder, he was asked about this this week, and he said, well, the players aren't necessarily worth this much. It's up to 100 million euros, but it will be paid because the teams want these players. So it will be interesting to see if that kind of thing continues happening. We've seen reports from a lot of different sources that maybe a club in Europe wants a player, they're quoted one price. A Premier League club comes in, they're quoted a different price, which is a lot higher. Because teams know that English clubs are pretty much the only ones with any kind of spending money in Europe. So they feel justified asking for higher prices. So that might be the precedent that it sets, that English clubs have the money and are more willing to spend it.
What trends have you seen this window that you might not have seen in other windows?
There's maybe one, in terms of just players, there's one that I'm really interested to see what happens with. And the two best teams in England are Liverpool and Manchester City. And the two biggest signings that they have made are Erling Haaland and Darwin Núñez, who are two, what you'd maybe call old-fashioned number nines, big target men types. They have a lot more facets to their game, obviously, but they're bigger strikers than we're used to seeing. So it'll be interesting to see. Football's always cyclical. Everything comes back around. Maybe we're seeing a bit of a return to the mid-90s where every English team had a big man up top. Obviously, they have a lot more things to their game, but that might be an interesting one to see if other teams kind of follow that kind of mold. The two other ones, which will probably be more important across the board, particularly in England, this is the first summer where FIFA have brought in some rules that are aimed at trying to stop clubs from stockpiling players. We've seen Chelsea and Manchester City in particular have a lot of players out on loan. From this summer, you're only allowed 8 players to be loaned out to international clubs. That drops to 7 next year and 6 the year after that. So we've already seen Manchester City in particular have sold off a lot of their younger players. Southampton have bought 4 of them. So someone like Romeo Lavia, who scored a fantastic goal midweek, he's joined Southampton permanently. That might be the sort of transfer we see a little bit more of. And the other one that, again, has come up this week is because of Brexit, our work permit rules have changed. Previously, when we were part of the EU, Premier League clubs could buy as many players as they liked from EU clubs or that had EU passports. That's no longer the case. So Fulham in particular this week tried to buy Justin Kluivert, son of Patrick, on loan from Roma. He's Dutch, so usually that wouldn't be a problem. However, he failed to get a work permit. He hadn't played enough games at a high enough level to qualify automatically. So those sort of players, someone like Riyad Mahrez wouldn't be allowed to join Leicester. N'Golo Kante wouldn't be allowed to join Leicester because they didn't have enough points under the new system. So that narrows and changes the windows where players can be bought from. South American leagues have been given a bit of a boost. You may see more players like Marquinhos, who joined Arsenal this summer, or Julian Alvarez, who joined Manchester City. Those sort of players will become a little more common, and those maybe from the second and third tier of the top divisions in France, the Netherlands, Spain, they will become a little bit less common.
In terms of spending, do you think this has an impact for the rest of football in terms of lower leagues?
I don't think it will necessarily have an impact on the lower divisions. It will probably be more seen across Europe. We'll all remember when the Super League, the European Super League, was first floated. The real reason that was brought about was the European teams feel like they're being left behind by the financial power of the Premier League in particular. Now, there's 3 clubs that are still part of it. They're still waiting to see if their legal challenge is successful. But Real Madrid, Barcelona and Juventus are still part of it. It may be that we see that come back in some form because teams like Nottingham Forest are spending huge amounts of money, far more than any team, even in the Champions League from Europe, can afford. We've actually seen the Premier League just in this window. I think it broke the record for the most money spent in a window last week. So we still had 7 days to go. It had already broken the record. They spent more than double than any other league. And if you look at the net spend, it's even more stark. The net spend is 1.3 billion euros for the Premier League. The nearest one to that of the big leagues in Europe is La Liga. Their net spend is 55 million euros. So a tiny, tiny fraction. So that might be where we see more of an impact. In terms of it trickling down, we don't really see it because a lot of the teams below the Premier League, when they get a big sale, a lot of it is reinvested into paying down debt or infrastructure. And you look at the Championship, it's only maybe 4 or 5 clubs that have really spent any money at all on players. The 3 relegated teams, Burnley, Norwich and Watford. And then it's players like Hull, who have a new owner who's trying to make a splash. Sunderland, who have a new owner, splashing a bit of cash and newly promoted. And someone like Middlesbrough, who've had 2 big sales. So they're the only ones really that can afford to reinvest. Everywhere else, it's free transfers and the spending goes on wages. So it doesn't really trickle down, but the ones across Europe, that's probably where it'll have more of an impact.
Just on that, where you're saying about spending and obviously breaking the records, where do you see the future of spending going? Do you think it will continue to increase year on year and continue to break the records? Or do you think there will be a cap, and could you see the price for players maybe plateauing?
It's going to be interesting to see. It's already on the downslope in continental Europe. In the Premier League, the new broadcast rights cycle is very interesting because for the first time ever, the Premier League is going to make more money from selling their TV rights overseas than it does in the UK. So if that trend continues, they have a huge new contract in Scandinavia. NBC in the United States have renegotiated with a much higher fee. It's becoming more popular overseas. So if that trend continues, you can see the Premier League end up spending more money, the Premier League club spending more money. Another impact might be the value of the pound over the euro. Without getting too deep into the economics, that makes continental players more expensive for Premier League players. So I don't think it will necessarily continue to skyrocket, mainly because the very expensive players haven't historically been the most successful ones. If you look at Manchester City, for example, they spend a lot in the 40, 50, 60 million pound range, which is a lot, but that's not the top of the market. They're the ones that seem to be more successful. The ones that are right at the top, look at Coutinho joining Barcelona, not a success. Kylian Mbappe is probably the only one that's been a success. Neymar to PSG, not been a success. Jack Grealish is yet to really show the £100 million form that we know he can at Manchester City. So it may be that those kind of ranges become more popular, the mid to high range, rather than the very, very top, because that seems to be where the value for money is. And clubs are getting cleverer and cleverer all the time. They have so much data at their hands. They're getting better at spotting those kind of players rather than going all out and spending huge, huge sums. So it might be that that's where we see the growth, not necessarily right at the top of the market.
Danny Jamieson from BT Sport, thank you very much.
No problem.